Hollywood has always relied on image charm and carefully constructed reputation, but some stars couldn't hide who they truly were. For decades, audiences have watched careers rise, collapse, and ultimately burn under the weight of scandal, arrogance, abuse, and behavior so shocking that even the industry itself turned away. These are not the stars the studios want you to remember. These are the names that earned public outrage, long-lasting resentment, and a legacy built not on fame but on hostility. From explosive controversies to long histories of mistreating others, each story reveals another layer of Hollywood's darker reality. And as you watch, ask yourself, which of these stars do you think deserves their place on this list? And which one shocked you the most? Comment your pick below, and let's see which name the audience agrees or disagrees with. 15. Amber Heard. Amber Heard's journey from rising actress to one of the most polarizing names in modern Hollywood reflects how rapidly a public image can unravel when personal conflict becomes a global spectacle. Before the turmoil, she appeared poised for long-term success, presenting herself as a confident performer with an increasingly visible platform. Her roles in genre films and high-profile franchises built a foundation that suggested steady upward momentum. Yet, as her private life entered the public arena, the controlled reputation she had crafted gave way to a flood of scrutiny that dominated global headlines. The legal battle with Johnny Depp became a cultural event far beyond anything seen in entertainment. As testimony recordings and messages circulated online, each detail sparked commentary, debate, and analysis. The courtroom turned into a stage observed by millions, and Heard's every expression became subject to interpretation. Critics accused her of dishonesty, manipulation, and exploiting social movements for personal gain. Supporters argued she was facing online harassment and disproportionate backlash. The sheer volume of discussion ensured that regardless of the verdict, her reputation would remain deeply fractured. The fallout extended far beyond the courtroom. Online reaction grew fierce, fueled by memes, viral edits, and relentless commentary that kept her name tied to negativity. Petitions circulated, major studios reconsidered her roles, and public appearances became lightning rods for criticism. Even statements intended to offer clarity or defend her position were met with skepticism. Viewers no longer responded to her as an actress, but as a symbol of controversy shaped by digital culture's unforgiving speed. Professionally, the consequences were immediate. Projects stalled, casting decisions shifted, and long-standing industry relationships cooled. Heard became a central figure in conversations about credibility, accountability, and public perception. Her attempt to reshape the narrative through interviews and new opportunities struggled against the weight of global opinion. What once seemed like a promising career now exists in the shadow of a trial that reshaped her legacy more than any film ever could. Today, Amber Heard remains one of Hollywood's most divisive figures, not solely because of the events themselves, but because of how intensely the world reacted to them. Her story illustrates how modern fame can crumble when personal conflict becomes public judgment, and why some stars find it almost impossible to rebuild their image once trust is lost. 14. Jaden Smith. Jaden Smith's shift from promising young performer to one of Hollywood's most divisive figures stems from a long pattern of behavior that audiences increasingly interpreted as pretentious, detached, and self-inflated. Early in his career, he carried enormous potential, a charismatic child actor with standout roles, and the benefit of being raised inside one of entertainment's most influential families. Many expected him to mature into a grounded, multifaceted artist. Instead, his public persona evolved into something far more puzzling, sparking irritation rather than admiration. Much of the backlash began with his cryptic and philosophical statements, often delivered as though he possessed insight beyond his years. Posts about reality intelligence and society projected an image of someone positioning himself above the audience he spoke to. What some saw as creativity, others viewed as arrogance. As these comments gained traction online, they shaped a version of Jaden that felt out of touch with ordinary experience, fueling the perception that he lacked humility and perspective. His artistic choices further widened the gap between him and the public. Music releases and experimental projects were often overshadowed by the belief that opportunities came not from talent alone, but from family connections. Critics argued that his performances lacked depth, while supporters maintained he was innovating. Yet even praise could not outweigh the steady flow of discussions about his behavior, particularly accounts from those who interpreted his demeanor as dismissive or self-important. Each interview, social statement, or creative venture became another opportunity for audiences to judge him harshly. Public appearances also contributed to the decline. His fashion expressions, while celebrated by some, were criticized by others as performative rather than authentic. The contrast between his avant-garde image and his privileged upbringing created a disconnect that viewers found difficult to reconcile. Many felt he portrayed himself as misunderstood by society, while ignoring the advantages that shaped his path. Instead of generating empathy, this stance amplified frustration. Despite his philanthropic work and ecological initiatives, skepticism persisted. Audiences questioned whether these efforts stemmed from genuine care or a desire to reinforce a visionary persona. Even positive achievements struggled to escape the shadow of his controversial public image. In the digital age where personality is scrutinized as intensely as craft, Jaden became an easy target for criticism that compounded over time. Today, Jaden Smith remains a figure whose talent and ambition are overshadowed by a reputation for eccentricity and self-importance. His story highlights how quickly admiration can shift when a star seems disconnected from the people they seek to reach, and how difficult it can be to regain trust once the public decides a celebrity has lost touch with reality. 13. James Corden. James Corden's reversal from a widely embraced entertainer to one of Hollywood's most criticized figures is a striking example of how a carefully crafted public persona can collapse when behind-the-scenes behavior surfaces. At the height of his career, he appeared warm, approachable, and effortlessly humorous. His late-night show produced viral moments, celebrity collaborations, and high-energy segments that made him seem like one of the most likable personalities on television. Yet as time passed, accounts from staff, restaurant workers, and fellow performers painted a far different picture, one that undermined the charm audiences believed was genuine. The shift began when stories emerged describing Corden as demanding and dismissive off-camera. Reports from service workers detailed moments where he allegedly reacted with hostility over minor inconveniences, creating the impression of someone who expected special treatment at all times. These incidents spread quickly, amplified by social media, and audiences struggled to reconcile the kind host they saw on screen with the abrasive figure described by those who encountered him privately. The disconnect made viewers feel deceived, fueling a wave of resentment. Insiders from his productions added to the narrative. Accounts circulated about tension, on-set impatience during rehearsals, and a habit of speaking harshly to crew members. While not every story was substantiated, the consistency across multiple sources shaped a perception that he was far more difficult to work with than previously known. The public began to view his on-screen personality as a performance rather than a reflection of character, and this sense of inauthenticity became one of the main reasons his reputation deteriorated so quickly. Corden's responses to controversies often intensified frustration rather than calming it. Attempts at humor or playful deflection were interpreted as avoidance, and apologies were seen as carefully crafted rather than heartfelt. Each incident chipped away at his credibility, and audiences, who once celebrated his work, began greeting his appearances with skepticism or irritation. Even harmless segments from his show were reevaluated through the lens of his alleged behavior. Professionally, the decline was noticeable. Viral enthusiasm faded, media coverage grew colder, and public sentiment shifted from admiration to fatigue. Collaborations that once boosted his popularity now received mixed reactions, as viewers questioned whether his friendly demeanor toward guests was genuine. The same charisma that had launched his American career began to feel strained, unable to overcome the stories that had reshaped his reputation. Today, James Corden stands as a reminder that audiences value authenticity as much as talent. His fall from grace was not the result of a single scandal, but of accumulating accounts that suggested his kindness was reserved for the spotlight alone. For many viewers, that disconnect is what placed him among the most disliked figures in modern Hollywood. 12. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey's transformation from one of Hollywood's most respected performers to one of its most reviled figures marks one of the most dramatic reputation collapses in entertainment history. For years, he was admired for his mastery of complex characters, his commanding presence, and a body of work that earned critical acclaim worldwide. But as allegations of predatory behavior emerged, the artistry that once defined him became secondary to the disturbing accounts that reshaped the public's understanding of who he truly was. The initial accusations alone were enough to shock audiences, but what intensified the outrage was the growing number of individuals who came forward with similar stories. The pattern described involving abuse of influence, manipulation, and inappropriate conduct painted a far broader and more troubling picture than anyone anticipated. Viewers struggled to reconcile the controlled intellectual image he displayed publicly with the behavior detailed by his accusers. As these accounts spread, Spacey's reputation crumbled at a pace that stunned even industry insiders. Hollywood reacted swiftly. Productions removed him, scenes were reshot, and franchises severed ties to distance themselves from the controversy. The speed and decisiveness of the industry's response highlighted the severity of the allegations. In an ecosystem that often protects powerful figures, the abrupt rejection of Spacey signaled a breaking point, a rare moment where public sentiment, studio ethics, and professional necessity aligned. His name, once synonymous with excellence, became a symbol of abuse and unchecked authority. Spacey's own attempts to address the situation deepened the public's discomfort. His statements were viewed as evasive, and his unusual online videos, performed in a style reminiscent of one of his well-known characters, struck many as unsettling rather than introspective. Instead of demonstrating accountability, these appearances made him seem detached from the gravity of the accusations. Viewers interpreted them as calculated attempts to reclaim relevance rather than genuine efforts to confront the harm he was accused of causing. Over time, legal battles produced mixed outcomes, but public perception remained unmoved. For many, the question was never solely about courts or verdicts, but about the collective testimony and the cultural shift that demanded greater accountability from those in power. His former projects, once celebrated, now carry a stain that cannot be separated from his personal controversies. The controversy overshadowed decades of work, and conversations about his legacy inevitably returned to the allegations that ended his career. Today, Kevin Spacey stands as one of Hollywood's most deeply disliked figures, not only because of the accusations themselves, but because of the profound breach of trust they represent. His downfall serves as a reminder of how quickly public admiration evaporates when a star's private actions are revealed to be dramatically at odds with the persona they presented to the world. 11. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf's fall from admired young talent to one of Hollywood's most heavily criticized figures reflects the cumulative impact of years of erratic behavior, public altercations, and deeply troubling allegations. Early in his career, he was seen as a dynamic performer with genuine potential, a rare mix of comedic instinct, emotional depth, and mainstream appeal. But as he transitioned into adulthood, his reputation became defined less by artistic promise and more by a pattern of volatility that audiences found increasingly difficult to overlook. His series of public outbursts and legal incidents marked the beginning of a long decline. Arrests, intoxicated confrontations, and disruptive behavior in public spaces created a narrative of instability. Videos circulated widely showing encounters that ranged from aggressive to incoherent. Each incident further distanced him from the relatability and charm that once attracted fans. Instead of viewing him as a troubled artist, many began to see him as someone unwilling or unable to take responsibility for the chaos he repeatedly created. The most serious damage to LaBeouf's image came from allegations made by former partners describing emotional abuse, manipulation, and harmful conduct. These accounts broadened the public's understanding of the consequences of his behavior, shifting the conversation from personal struggle to the harm inflicted on others. His responses, often framed as reflections on trauma or addiction, were met with skepticism. Many felt he offered explanations without accepting accountability, reinforcing the belief that he remained unwilling to confront the full impact of his actions. Professional relationships also deteriorated. Directors and co-workers described tension on set, difficulty maintaining boundaries, and unpredictable shifts in temperament. His efforts to reinvent himself through experimental art projects, including performance installations and conceptual works, were interpreted by critics as attempts to distract from controversy rather than genuine creative evolution. What might have been admired as artistic boldness instead became a source of confusion, contributing to the perception that he was lost in self-created turmoil. Attempts at public apology and personal transformation have not meaningfully shifted public sentiment. Even expressions of vulnerability, while appreciated by some, were overshadowed by years of documented conflict. The public's patience diminished with each new incident, and audiences struggled to separate the performer from the destructive patterns he appeared unable to break. Today, Shia LaBeouf stands as one of the most divisive figures in Hollywood, a performer whose talent is eclipsed by a legacy of controversy, instability, and harm. His story illustrates how repeated misconduct, even when accompanied by moments of reflection, can erode public trust beyond repair. 10. Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez represents a unique case in Hollywood, a global superstar whose fame has only grown while public frustration around her has intensified. For decades, she was celebrated for her versatility, a performer who could command stages, star in romantic comedies, dominate red carpets, and build successful business ventures. Yet, beneath the glamorous image, a narrative developed portraying her as demanding, aloof, and overly protective of her public persona. Over time, this perception hardened, turning admiration into irritation for a significant segment of the audience. One of the main sources of criticism is Lopez's alleged treatment of those who work around her. Stories have circulated for years about strict rules for assistants, cold interactions with service workers, and an expectation of preferential treatment that many interpreted as entitlement. Whether every story is accurate matters less than how consistently they appear. The repeated claims formed a portrait of someone who values hierarchy and image far more than humility. The distance between her polished, friendly exterior and these accounts fueled a sense of disappointment among viewers who once saw her as relatable. Her personal life also became a focal point of public scrutiny. Lopez's high-profile relationships, breakups, and rapid transitions between partners created a narrative that some found performative. What began as fascination eventually turned into fatigue, as audiences questioned whether the constant publicity was strategic rather than authentic. The reunion and subsequent tensions with Ben Affleck only deepened this conversation. Public appearances marked by awkward moments or visible disconnects fed the belief that Lopez sought to control narratives even at the expense of sincerity. Creative controversies added further complications. Discussions about ghost vocals, heavy production in her music, and reliance on stylists and choreographers contributed to a belief that her success stemmed more from branding than from artistry. Although she undeniably works hard, critics argued that she often overshadowed collaborators or downplayed the contributions of others. Old interview clips resurfaced in which she appeared to critique fellow performers, igniting debates about her generosity and professional respect. Attempts to reshape her public image through documentaries, behind-the-scenes content, or emotional interviews often had mixed results. Viewers sensed a calculated tone rather than vulnerability, reinforcing the idea that Lopez prioritizes perception over authenticity. Even celebrations of her accomplishments sometimes reignite criticism as audiences remain divided between admiration for her longevity and irritation at what they see as ambition untempered by humility. Today, Jennifer Lopez remains both incredibly influential and deeply polarizing. Her global reach is undeniable, yet so is the resentment that follows her. She embodies the tension between celebrity gloss and the expectations of a public that increasingly values transparency. For some, she is a hard-working icon. For others, she is a superstar defined by ego and carefully curated illusion. That conflicting legacy is what places her firmly on this list. 9. Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow's shift from admired actress to one of Hollywood's most polarizing figures reflects how a celebrity's public image can erode when privileged detachment and questionable ventures intersect. Early in her career, she was celebrated for graceful performances, critical acclaim, and a calm, poised persona. She appeared sophisticated, intelligent, and grounded, someone whose Hollywood pedigree enhanced rather than harmed her appeal. Yet as she moved away from acting and into lifestyle entrepreneurship, the traits that once seemed elegant began to feel out of touch with real-world audiences. The launch of her wellness brand marked the major turning point. What began as a platform for aspirational living quickly became synonymous with pseudoscience, extreme health claims, and luxury items priced far beyond ordinary reach. Critics and medical experts regularly scrutinized the company's products and advice, calling them misleading or irresponsible. To many viewers, Paltrow appeared uninterested in whether her claims were supported by evidence, focusing instead on maintaining an image of enlightened exclusivity. Each headline reinforced the growing belief that she lived in a world disconnected from practical reality. Her public statements only intensified this impression. Interviews in which she discussed lifestyle routines, parenting, or personal wellness often sounded dismissive of anyone who lacked her resources. Comments referencing how hard certain aspects of her privileged life were came across as tone-deaf. Instead of appearing relatable or aspirational, she seemed insulated, a figure speaking from a level of comfort that only highlighted the distance between her and her audience. Even positive intentions were overshadowed by the perception that she lacked awareness of how her words landed. Her Hollywood relationships added to the controversy. Reports suggested she could be aloof, demanding, or overly selective, creating tension on set or among peers. Although not all claims were confirmed, the mixture of rumors and real anecdotes shaped a public image of someone whose refinement carried an undercurrent of superiority. Viewers began to see her less as an actor with artistic integrity and more as a symbol of elitism within the entertainment world. The skiing accident lawsuit further amplified public debate. While many agreed the legal outcome favored her, audiences were sharply divided about her demeanor in court. Some praised her composure. Others saw her as distant and unempathetic. Her final comment to the plaintiff, intended by some interpretations as polite, was viewed by critics as curt or dismissive. The trial may not have damaged her legally, but it entrenched perceptions of a celebrity out of sync with ordinary human experience. Today, Gwyneth Paltrow remains a figure who evokes strong reactions. Admirers see a businesswoman who forged her own empire. Detractors see someone whose wealth insulated her from accountability. Her story highlights how quickly public perception can shift when a star's worldview feels inaccessible or unrealistic. For many, that disconnect is what makes her one of the most disliked figures in modern Hollywood. 8. Jared Leto. Jared Leto's decline in public favor is one of Hollywood's most striking examples of how a performer's eccentric persona can evolve into widespread distrust and discomfort. Early in his career, he was praised for intensity, artistic ambition, and a willingness to transform himself physically for roles. Audiences saw him as a committed actor who embraced unconventional projects. But as stories accumulated and his off-screen reputation grew more controversial, admiration gradually turned into skepticism and eventually into strong dislike from a large portion of the public. A major factor in Leto's reputation shift is the long list of troubling accounts tied to his method acting approach. What some initially viewed as dedication soon began to seem intrusive or inappropriate. Reports from sets described behavior that made colleagues uneasy, sending disturbing items to cast members, refusing to break character in ways that disrupted production, and blurring professional boundaries under the justification of staying in role. Instead of enhancing performances, these actions appeared self-indulgent, suggesting that he prioritized personal theatrics over the well-being of his coworkers. Outside film sets, his personal conduct attracted additional scrutiny. Online discussions surfaced for years about questionable interactions with significantly younger women, creating a cloud of suspicion that never fully dissipated. Even when not formally pursued in the legal system, the pattern of similar claims fueled public concern. Leto's tendency to avoid addressing these issues directly deepened the discomfort, making it difficult for audiences to separate accusations from the persona he projected. Professionally, his choices added to the backlash. His portrayal of comic book characters drew sharp criticism for being exaggerated, inconsistent, or misaligned with franchise tones. Rather than being seen as bold performances, they were often viewed as self-important experiments, disconnected from audience expectations. His musical career also contributed to the uneasy public perception, with some critics noting a cult-like atmosphere around his fan base that blurred the line between artistic community and emotional manipulation. Interviews further strained his relationship with the public. Leto often spoke in cryptic or philosophical terms, presenting himself as mysterious or enlightened. Many interpreted this as pretension rather than depth. Combined with his notoriety for aloofness, these interviews reinforced the idea that he lacked genuine self-awareness. What once seemed like creative eccentricity came to represent disconnect, a celebrity more invested in image than sincerity. Today, Jared Leto stands as one of Hollywood's most polarizing figures. His talent remains undeniable, yet the controversies surrounding him overshadow nearly every project he undertakes. For many viewers, the combination of questionable behavior, strained professional relationships, and a public persona steeped in self-stylized mystique is what ultimately secures his place among the most disliked stars in the industry. 7. Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres' fall from one of television's most beloved personalities to one of its most criticized figures is a powerful example of how rapidly public trust can collapse when the image presented on screen no longer aligns with the stories emerging behind it. For years, Ellen cultivated a reputation built on warmth, kindness, humor, and generosity. Her show became a daytime staple, celebrated for uplifting moments and emotional surprises. But as accounts from former employees and industry insiders surfaced, that carefully maintained persona began to unravel, revealing cracks that dramatically altered how audiences viewed her. The initial allegations described a workplace atmosphere far removed from the friendliness her brand promoted. Former staff members spoke of fear favoritism and emotional strain, claiming that the environment was toxic and difficult to navigate. While Ellen was not implicated in every account, critics argued that she allowed and at times ignored a system that harmed those beneath her. The sense of betrayal these stories generated was immense. Viewers who once trusted her message of kindness felt misled, believing that the persona they admired was more performance than reality. Guest experiences deepened the controversy. Some recalled moments of coldness or unexpected dismissiveness contradicting the cheerful host seen on television. Stories about strict rules, awkward interactions, and inconsistencies in her behavior spread across social media, reinforcing the idea that Ellen's on-camera charisma masked a far less pleasant demeanor off-screen. The contrast between public image and alleged reality became a central point of frustration, turning disappointment into a sharper, more widespread dislike. Ellen's response to the allegations played a major role in shaping public perception. When she addressed the controversy on air, critics felt her words lacked sincerity and accountability. Attempts to shift blame toward senior staff or frame the situation as a misunderstanding came across as defensive. Instead of rebuilding trust, the apology amplified doubts. Viewers sensed a calculated attempt at damage control rather than genuine reflection, and the reaction only intensified skepticism surrounding her integrity. The consequences extended quickly. Ratings declined as audiences disengaged, advertisers expressed concern, and discussions about replacing her grew louder. The once celebrated set became synonymous with controversy, and longtime viewers struggled to reconcile their admiration with the stories of mistreatment. Even moments of generosity that previously won public affection were now met with doubt, as though each positive act served merely to reinforce a fading narrative rather than reflect authentic character. Today, Ellen DeGeneres stands as a cautionary example of how fragile public trust can be when authenticity comes into question. Her downfall wasn't fueled by a single scandal, but by the collective realization that the kindness she broadcast for years may not have extended beyond the camera lens. For many, this disconnect is what cemented her status as one of Hollywood's most disliked figures. 6. Katherine Heigl. Katherine Heigl's shift from celebrated actress to one of Hollywood's most criticized figures stemmed not from a single incident, but from a series of decisions and comments that gradually alienated colleagues, writers, and audiences. Early in her career, she was widely admired for her charm, comedic timing, and emotional range. Her breakout roles positioned her as a rising star, with both mainstream appeal and critical potential, and many believed she was destined for long-term success. Yet, as her fame grew, so did stories suggesting she was difficult, dismissive, and unwilling to collaborate gracefully. The public turning point began when Heigl openly criticized some of her most successful projects. She publicly distanced herself from a hit romantic comedy, calling it sexist and poorly written, and later withdrew her own name from consideration for a major television award, claiming the writing on her show did not merit recognition. These statements shocked audiences and colleagues alike, not only because they targeted the projects that elevated her career, but because they appeared ungrateful and unnecessarily harsh. Writers and producers felt undermined, and fans were left questioning her respect for the teams that supported her rise. Behind the scenes, additional stories circulated. Crew members described her as demanding, frequently dissatisfied, and prone to challenging creative decisions in ways that slowed production or created tension. While many actors advocate for themselves, Heigl's reputation developed around the belief that she approached collaboration with an adversarial mindset. Directors noted difficulty maintaining smooth workflows, and fellow cast members reportedly found her interactions abrupt or critical. Whether every story was accurate mattered less than how consistently they appeared, forming a larger pattern that painted her as hard to work with. Attempts to address the criticism did little to soften public sentiment. Interviews meant to clarify her perspective often reinforced the impression that she lacked awareness of how her behavior affected others. She expressed confusion about why she was disliked, framing the backlash as unfair rather than acknowledging the impact of her choices. This perceived defensiveness deepened frustration among audiences and industry professionals who felt she had not taken responsibility for the damage to her reputation. Professionally, the consequences were swift. Once a favorite in romantic comedies and sought-after projects, she began losing opportunities as studios hesitated to hire someone linked to workplace tension. Attempts at career reinvention through television roles, streaming projects, and dramatic performances were met with mixed reactions. Even when her work was strong, viewers found it difficult to separate the actress from the reputation that followed her. Today, Katherine Heigl remains a polarizing figure in Hollywood. For some, her talent is undeniable. For others, her legacy is defined by conflict, miscommunication, and a perceived lack of humility. Her story illustrates how quickly goodwill can erode when a rising star appears to disregard the collaborators who helped them succeed. 5. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase's legacy is a blend of remarkable comedic talent and a reputation for hostility that has followed him throughout his career. In his early years, he was celebrated for sharp timing and an irreverent charm that helped define a new era of sketch comedy. But as he moved deeper into film and television, stories from writers, cast members, and crew revealed a far more difficult personality behind the humor, one marked by cutting remarks, impatience, and an unwillingness to collaborate. Many accounts focused on his treatment of coworkers. Writers recalled him dismissing sketches with harsh criticism, while cast members described interactions in which he mocked their abilities or contributions. Over time, these stories formed a consistent picture. Chase often created uncomfortable, even hostile environments. His behavior on a popular ensemble sitcom years later reinforced this view. Reports described escalating conflicts with the showrunner, tension with castmates, and disruptions caused by his refusal to accept creative direction. His departure from the series felt inevitable once the working environment became unsustainable. Public interviews did little to soften his image. Chase's blunt, sometimes offensive remarks made him appear unapologetic and uninterested in self-reflection. Even nostalgic fans struggled to overlook the growing number of negative accounts associated with his name. Younger audiences, encountering him mainly through stories of conflict rather than his earlier work, came to view him primarily as a difficult figure rather than a pioneer in comedy. Today, Chevy Chase stands as a cautionary example of how talent can be overshadowed by years of unprofessional behavior. His contributions to comedy remain influential, but the strained relationships and long record of abrasive conduct are what secure his place among Hollywood's most disliked figures. 4. Lea Michele. Lea Michele's reputation collapse stands as one of Hollywood's clearest examples of how a carefully constructed public image can disintegrate when accusations of mistreatment surface from those who worked closest with a star. In the early stages of her career, she was admired for her stage-honed vocals, emotional performances, and the determination that carried her from Broadway to international television fame. To many viewers, she embodied discipline, ambition, and a polished professionalism that set her apart. But as former cast members began sharing stories about her off-screen conduct, The admiration that once surrounded her quickly turned into widespread disdain. The turning point came when colleagues publicly described her behavior as dismissive, controlling, and at times aggressively unkind. Former castmates recounted moments where she allegedly belittled them, created tension on set, or made working conditions emotionally draining. These accounts were especially powerful because they came from multiple individuals with consistent experiences, forming a pattern that felt difficult to dismiss as exaggeration or isolated conflict. For fans who had seen her portray sympathetic, earnest characters, the contrast felt jarring, almost like discovering that the warmth they associated with her performances was an illusion. As additional stories emerged, a broader narrative took shape. Reports suggested that Michelle often used her seniority to intimidate those around her, particularly newer or less established performers. The allegations highlighted a hierarchy that she allegedly reinforced through exclusionary behavior and condescending remarks. In an industry that already struggles with power imbalances, these claims struck a nerve with the public. What frustrated viewers most was not only the alleged bullying, but the sense that her behavior contradicted the inspirational persona she projected. Her response to the backlash did little to ease tensions. Michelle issued a public apology, but many interpreted it as corporate and impersonal, a statement crafted to protect her brand rather than a sincere acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Critics noted the absence of direct accountability, and audiences felt her attempt to distance herself from the accusations lacked emotional depth. This perceived evasiveness intensified the negativity surrounding her, making the apology itself a source of further criticism. Professionally, the impact was significant. Projects became hesitant to associate with her, public enthusiasm faded, and discussions about her career increasingly centered around her alleged treatment of coworkers rather than her talent. Even opportunities meant to showcase personal growth or reinvention were met with skepticism as viewers struggled to trust the sincerity of her efforts. Interviews intended to display vulnerability or transformation were often overshadowed by doubts rooted in the earlier allegations. Today, Lea Michele remains a polarizing figure whose downfall serves as a reminder that audiences value authenticity and respect as much as performance skill. The perception that she engaged in harmful behavior behind the scenes while presenting a contrasting image in public is what ultimately solidified her place among Hollywood's most disliked figures. 3. Chris Brown. Chris Brown's long-standing position as one of the most disliked figures in entertainment is rooted in a pattern of violence, hostility, and public conflict that has overshadowed his early promise as a performer. When he first emerged in the music industry, he was viewed as an exceptionally talented young artist with charisma, vocal ability, and the potential to dominate charts for years. But the shocking assault of a fellow global superstar transformed his image instantly, marking a turning point from rising icon to one of the most polarizing names in modern culture. The event was not just a scandal, it became a defining moment that fundamentally altered how audiences interpreted every action that followed. Although some public figures managed to rebuild their reputations over time, Brown repeatedly undermined attempts at redemption through further incidents of aggression, legal disputes, and volatile behavior. Each arrest, confrontation, or property damage report reinforced the perception that his initial act was not an isolated lapse, but part of a deeper pattern. Even when he released apologies or statements reflecting remorse, they were often followed by new controversies that made audiences question their sincerity. Instead of demonstrating sustained personal growth, Brown's responses frequently came across as defensive or hostile, fueling the belief that he had not truly reckoned with the harm he caused. Online interactions added another layer to the negative perception. Social media became a battleground where Brown often lashed out at critics, rivals, and even fans. Public arguments, mocking posts, sudden outbursts created the image of someone who remained deeply reactive and unstable. These digital interactions amplified his most controversial traits, making them visible to millions at once. Even positive accomplishments, new albums, performances, or artistic achievements were inevitably overshadowed by the public's memory of his behavior, both past and present. Professionally, his career developed a divide rarely seen in entertainment, a loyal fan base that continues to support him, and a much larger audience that refuses to engage with his work due to ethical concerns. Awards shows distanced themselves, major brands avoided partnerships, and many collaborators faced backlash for choosing to work with him. For critics and the general public, supporting Brown became synonymous with ignoring or minimizing the violence and instability that have characterized his life for more than a decade. Today, Chris Brown's legacy is defined less by his musical output and more by the persistent controversies that accompany him. His name evokes strong reactions, anger, disappointment, and a sense of unresolved tension. For many, he stands as a stark reminder that talent does not excuse harm, and that consistent patterns of destructive behavior can permanently reshape how the world views a celebrity. 2. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson's dramatic fall from celebrated Hollywood icon to one of the industry's most condemned figures is a defining example of how a career can disintegrate under the weight of a deeply damaged personal reputation. For years, he was regarded as a charismatic leading actor and a highly skilled director capable of shaping large-scale cinematic epics. His work earned global acclaim awards and a level of influence few in Hollywood ever achieve. But beneath the surface of professional triumphs lay a pattern of explosive behavior and hateful rhetoric that ultimately redefined him in the public eye. The turning point came when recordings surfaced, capturing Gibson's rage-filled tirades laced with threats, prejudice, and language that shocked even longtime fans. These moments shattered the heroic, honorable persona he had cultivated on screen. Audiences struggled to reconcile the performer they admired with the man revealed in those disturbing exchanges. The intensity and deeply offensive nature of his words set off a wave of public outrage, sparking discussions about bigotry, power, and accountability in Hollywood. Compounding the damage were additional incidents involving intoxication and confrontations with law enforcement. One arrest in particular revealed remarks that ignited widespread anger and further solidified public perception of Gibson as someone whose conduct crossed moral boundaries. His early attempts to explain or contextualize his behavior came across as defensive or evasive, leaving many to believe he did not fully grasp the seriousness of his actions. Instead of rebuilding trust, these statements deepened public disappointment and resentment. Hollywood's reaction was swift and unforgiving. Studios cut ties, projects were canceled, and prominent collaborators publicly distanced themselves. The industry's abrupt rejection of someone once considered untouchable demonstrated just how irreparable his reputation had become. While Hollywood often forgives lesser missteps, Gibson's behavior was seen as far too damaging, not just personally, but culturally, to ignore. Years later, Gibson attempted comebacks, releasing new work and participating in interviews framed around growth and redemption. Yet the response remained divided. For many viewers, no amount of artistic achievement could overshadow the harm represented by his past words and actions. Even when his later projects received critical praise, his presence revived long-standing controversy, proving that the stain on his reputation had never faded. Today, Mel Gibson stands as a symbol of how hateful behavior once revealed can dismantle even the most successful careers. His legacy is permanently shaped by the anger, prejudice, and volatility that came to define him more than any role or film. For countless audiences, that lasting impact is what places him near the top of the most hated figures in Hollywood history. 1. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein's downfall is one of the most consequential events in Hollywood history, transforming him from a dominant industry figure into a symbol of systemic abuse, fear, and exploitation. For decades, he wielded extraordinary power, shaping awards, seasons, launching careers, and influencing the direction of modern cinema. Yet behind that influence existed a pattern of conduct that remained hidden through intimidation, silence, and institutional complicity. When the truth finally emerged, it reshaped not only his reputation, but the cultural landscape of the entire entertainment world. The revelations began when investigative reports brought forth allegations spanning many years, describing coercion, manipulation, and abuse carried out under the guise of professional opportunity. As more individuals stepped forward, a chilling narrative emerged that Weinstein used his authority to trap, pressure, or silence those who depended on his approval. The accounts were disturbingly consistent, portraying a figure who exploited structural power to create an environment of fear. The scale of the accusations shocked global audiences, revealing a hidden dimension of Hollywood that many had long suspected but never seen confirmed at this magnitude. What intensified the outrage was the realization that countless insiders had been aware of Weinstein's behavior for years. Stories had circulated quietly, warnings, rumors, whispered conversations, yet no meaningful action had been taken. This collective silence deepened public anger, positioning Weinstein not merely as an individual offender, but as the embodiment of an industry that protected power at any cost. His downfall exposed the extent to which reputations, careers, and safety had been compromised to preserve his influence. The legal consequences were historic. As investigations proceeded, testimonies revealed the emotional and psychological trauma inflicted on his victims. Courtrooms became the stage on which decades of secrecy were finally confronted. His sentencing marked a turning point, sending a message that even the most powerful figures could be held accountable. The impact reverberated worldwide, sparking movements that reshaped workplace policies, public discourse, and the way society understands abuse of power. Professionally, Weinstein's legacy collapsed overnight. His company imploded, partnerships dissolved, and films once associated with prestige and awards became linked to controversy. His name was erased from credits, discussions, and promotional materials, treated as a stain unfit for acknowledgement. Attempts by some to separate the art from the individual were drowned out by recognition of the profound harm he had caused. Today, Harvey Weinstein stands as the definitive example of a Hollywood figure whose actions were so damaging that they redefined the moral boundaries of the industry. His name has become synonymous with betrayal of trust, systemic failure, and the darkest aspects of power. For many, he is not only the most hated figure in Hollywood history, he is a reminder of the cost of silence and the necessity of accountability. Hollywood thrives on glamour, but its shadows reveal stories far more unsettling. These names remind us that fame can magnify darkness just as easily as it magnifies talent, and that no amount of power or success can protect a star once the truth begins to surface. Behind every headline is a deeper pattern: unchecked ego, hidden cruelty, and consequences that eventually demand to be faced. As we close this chapter, tell us in the comments, which of these stars do you believe deserved their downfall the most, and who surprised you the most on this list? Your answers help shape the next investigation from Hollywood's hidden room, where the secrets never stay buried for long.